System, the maritime forest that we probably all know with live oak and hickory and all that. Great place, deer to hunt, and it has the marsh right next to it, which is the most productive ecosystem in the world. So the first Indians to live on St. Catharines lived right on that margin, right, usually along between the inland estuary by the intercoastal and the mainland, although most of these also have marsh systems on the ocean side, so there's another set of settlements there. These are among the very first sedentary, living in one place, foraging, not farming people in North America. They made the very first pottery in North America 5,000 years ago, and we have some really important ritual expressions that are also very early in the history of North America. And just to briefly tell this story, sea levels dropped about 3,500 years ago, about 2 meters. And what that did was kill the marsh all along the intercoastal waterway. So you have a landscape that is being used by native people, but they can't make a living anymore because there's no marsh. So they're moving on to the mainland, but what we know is the ritual activities still go on. We have burial mounds that are used during that period. So they're going back to the places of their ancestors for about 1,500 years. Sea levels come back up about 2,500 years ago. We can track it sometimes in the marsh. You see buried stumps and you see buried shellmans. That's from that early time period. But over the last 2,500 years, we've had people living in these islands, and the population is getting denser and denser, and territoriality is in. It's one of the last best places to live. And as we come up into, not quite to the mission period, we now have a tree ring record of 1,000 years in bald cypress. And we know that the Savannah River chieftains, the Irene Mound here in Savannah going up the river, all collapsed about AD 1300 because of a major drought. It took out their corn farming. Now, they were not corn farmers on St. Catharines, but they became involved in the larger Mississippian world of the southeast about 1400. We have lots of ways of approaching the ecology of this, but there's no reason in the world that these people should have stopped being hunters, collectors, fishers, and become farmers, but they did. About 100 years before the Spanish arrived, and my argument is that's the price of being in the Mississippian world. They're very tightly stratified, there's tribute flowing back and forth all the time, and the dollars are corn. So we can see in the teeth, we can see in the record, they become corn farmers, and that's one of the reasons they were so attractive to the Spanish, because that's also a very stratified society. And they could work through in the conversion, and the Franciscans were very involved in this. If you convert the cacique, the Miko, that Miko brings everybody else into the church, and it's an incredibly effective system on both sides of it. And then it goes up. I would argue that Mississippian society in the southeast survives in the missions of Georgia and Florida for a good 150 years after it survives in the rest of the southeast because of that symbiosis. There was something in it for both sides. And both sides said the big problem is we're running out of Indians. These are unhealthy conditions, the populations are up. Maize agriculture, turns out, is very unhealthy to your health. They were much healthier 500 years before they started becoming farmers. And the system collapses. So that, in a nutshell, is the last 5,000 years. Yes?
When you talk about the island eroding, what you say, 5 to 10 feet per year, are you specifically referring to just pure sea level rise, or is this enhanced erosion pattern?
Yeah, the question is about what's going on to create this erosion that we didn't even have 15 or 20 years ago. It's not simple sea level rise, although that is implicated in part of it. But it's such a changing in the storm dynamics, and you can probably all see it. We're getting storm surges that are different. They're coming out of a different direction. Part of it, too, is we've choked off the sand supplies with the dams that are coming down, and the dredging here in the Savannah River. A lot of those spoils are being taken out in the ocean rather than getting reworked into here again. So there are a number of dynamics going on. But we actually had a team of engineers over on St. Catharines today looking at creating living shorelines, as on Sapelo and Ossabaw. And there's some way it's not going to stop the processes that are going on, but there are some ways. This is, I would argue, one of the most important archaeological sites in this country. And we've got to do something to where it's handed down to our grandkids. We're doing the archaeology. We can conserve information that way. We've got to do something about these salt creeks. And if we project the assumptions, they're just not going to be here. So there are a number of short-term things that are being done, but it's a very complex process and lots of conversation. Yes?
You said there was other scientific stuff being done in St. Catherine's. Can you tell us a little bit about the lemurs?
Yeah, about the rest of science on St. Catherine's, for decades there was an endangered species program that was going on in cooperation with the Bronx Zoo. So when I first came there, we had zebras and red kangaroos, and we still have 100 free-ranging lemurs who are sort of the symbol of the island. In some ways, there are more lemurs here than there are in Madagascar. So scientists are coming and studying those, but more and more we're shifting we have a small grant program, we're inviting scientists from anywhere to come and do science on St. Catherine's, as long as it's a place that you can only do on St. Catherine's, a study. So we have probably 15, the sea turtle research that's going on is second to none. We're understanding a lot about the 30-year cycle of sea turtles and how they navigate. The nests are under incredible pressure because of the erosion and also because of the predators, particularly hogs and raccoons. So there's a great deal of research that's being done there. A long list. And I'll also say we're doing a lot of other archaeology besides just the mission as well. Yes?
Is there any bioarchaeology currently being conducted on St. Catherine's?
Bioarchaeology, and that means there are 4 kinds of anthropology, and the study of human variation of human bones. Yes, there's considerable going on. The cemetery in the mission itself, the mission neophytes, 432 people is one of the best known colonial studies that has been done, although they've been reburied. And we're continuing further studies as well. Yeah. Yes?
What differences do you see with the wall of domestic structures inside the mission compound versus outside the compound?
I didn't quite hear all that. The wall structures.
With the wall structures inside the compound, like domestic structures, how is that different from them outside of the compound?
Okay, the question is about the architecture, and it's a hard one because we don't understand it as well as we should. In the mission control, the heartland part of it that I've been talking about, those are wattle and daub structures that our instruments could see very clearly. As we moved out into the Indian Pueblo part that surrounds that, which is the home for the 1,000 Indians who go to church there, we thought we could just go find those houses just like that. We've done any number of remote sensing studies, and they're really hard to see. They're not being made out of wattle and daub. And there's some kind of construction that is using brush and timbers and things that are very well preserved. We found a few of the houses now, but they're really hard to see. One thing that does carry over between the late prehistoric Mississippian villages is the council house, which is a huge structure. It's about the size of this room, except it's round. There was one found and reconstructed at San Luis in Tallahassee. But if you think about a native building that can seat 2,000 people, that's a pretty impressive thing. Only a couple have been found. We've been looking for them. And again, we haven't been as successful as we like. Paul here, on Ossabaw one was just found, and we're hoping that the University of Georgia is going to be working on that. But there are a number of carryovers in the architecture between native communities and the church. That's a lot of what we're studying right now all across the country. And in particular, the Franciscan order is good about involving local architecture because it makes the learning and the situation much easier than just imposing a bunch of strange buildings. But that's very much what we're looking at right now. Yes?
If I understood you correctly, you said that one of the causes of the conflict that resulted in the breaking of the bells and the salvaging of the pieces of the bells subsequently was from tribal populations who wanted basically into the program.
Right.
I'm wondering why, I don't know how to phrase this here, but why would anybody want it? I would think that the conversion process would be an arduous one for somebody with several thousand years of tradition and tribal ways. Why would they want in, and why would it be difficult for them to get it?
You just asked kind of the key question behind all of this, because that's what everybody has thought up to now, is that we look at a colonial situation as an oppressor and someone being oppressed. And the Pueblo Revolt could be, and has been viewed that way, of 1680, that you had a faction throwing out Spain, throwing out the Franciscan order. The Pueblo Revolt here of 1597 has been viewed that same way. There's a great deal of looking at the colonial experience. That's what happens when you read the records. And it doesn't matter whether it's here or in the Southwest or in California, the people who write the books are the ones who won the wars. And the question is, how do you get the other stories that are in there? And part of it is a closer reading of the documents. Part of it is native language, part of it is oral history, but part of it's archaeology. And what we're finding is, as we do the archaeology, particularly Santa Catalina de Valle is a good example of this, unlike some parts of the country, the academic community really they play well together here. So when we have a dig, we'll also have all the historians come from St. Augustine and different places, and they'll look at what I've shown you today, and they'll say, our view of poor little St. Augustine, one of the poorest of the 200 colonies that Spain has around, which has been the interpretation, that couldn't possibly be right with the 65,000 deeds that are in Laurie's book and the rest of it. So a rereading of the historical documents is showing an entire economic system that's off the books. The friars are calling it the rescate. What it's doing is, and as we've talked to many Franciscan scholars, I'm raising these questions like with you, and the answers I'm hearing are, we need to understand what Franciscan life is like. It's about salvation. And if we have to change some of the other things to save those souls, we're going to do it. At this March meeting we had, one of the fathers said, you have to look at the Franciscan order, maybe you won't appreciate this, as amiable anarchists. And that by that he meant we are putting the salvation of souls above all else. So what they're doing is working with the local tribal leaders, keeping them in place, and basically empowering them, the native leaders, to stay in power when their rivals are falling out of power. So it's a matter of bringing in and the tribute that Spain is giving to the Indians, and particularly the Indian leaders in these missions, it's not weapons, and there is a little gold and silver involved, but what it really is are these traditional symbols of power that keep them in place and allow them to get their people to move along in what they consider to be a mutually beneficial system. It's a totally different way of looking at it, and what I'm telling you is thinking that's only about 10 years old, and we're going to have to go through a lot of critique here before that becomes the conventional wisdom. But it's showing, why is it that individual people, communities of practice, rather than just we're Spanish or we're Indian or something, looking, we have to raise our kids, we have to live in this. What's our best chance? What should we keep from the old ways? What should we do in the new way? These are real people coping with a difficult reality, and we've seen some pretty intriguing decision making. Okay? Thank you very much for your time.